Welcome to Viewpoint for the City of Farmington, Bill Costick. With me today as a special co-host is City Councilman Larry Lichtman. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, Larry, and we have an exciting show. I hope. I know that there are several topics that you've been very interested in with the city, and I think we have planned for you an exciting show. We're going to talk about several things that have been going on in our community. And why don't you share what the topics are, Larry?
Well, I think that it's going to be a very informative show. I think we're going to touch on some topics that have been of special interest to residents in the last year. We're going to talk about what's going on with public facilities, including what has been done and what's on the schedule for Heritage Park, the status of the Peltz MDOT property, which has been in the news quite a bit, the possible expansion of the district court, and we're going to talk about the ramifications of the Parks and Rec millage renewal, and also talk about the very timely issue of power outages in the city and what we're doing in connection with Detroit Edison to try and correct that. And finally, I know we're going to discuss the 12-Mile Road Boulevard project and potential plans to widen and possibly boulevard portions of Orchard Lake Road.
A lot of topics to cover in our half-hour show, but we'll give it a shot. Well, first, on the whole question of public facilities, we own a lot of properties throughout the city. Not to mention the least would be our City Hall complex and police station, but one of the premier pieces of property we own is Heritage Park. It's beautiful. It's turned out to be one of the nicest developments of the decade that we just completed, and we have some challenges yet that remain there.
Well, I think Heritage Park is definitely a jewel, and I think everybody in the city is very glad that we have it. It's nice to have that amount of acreage in the heart of the city that everybody can enjoy. I have a young family, and over the course of the summer we get there quite a bit, and it seems each time that we're there we find more and more people using it. So it's become a very popular place to picnic and enjoy recreational activities and to enjoy the beautiful natural setting. And I think that your staff can be very proud, and the Parks and Rec Commission can be very proud, because they've done a very nice job to date in terms of the projects they've undertaken there, and I think that everyone is very pleased with them.
Well, there are some challenges too, Larry, that remain ahead of us. We've just completed and soon to open the Spicer Estate House, but some of the barns need extensive work. The dairy barn, as you know, recently one of the foundation walls collapsed. We are in the process now of taking construction bids to repair that, to make it safe, and to get that barn so that it can function. We've had it fenced off for years. And I know that you're familiar with the request to place all the farm buildings in the historic district, and those buildings need some work as well.
Well, of course, one of the things that is on the long-term plan for Heritage Park is to have an actual working farm there. And, of course, these improvements are necessary in order to ultimately fulfill that objective. So the City Council did, this year, I'm aware, budget some monies for the renovation of the barn that you made reference to. And I suppose it's possible that in the future, as plans progress, we will have to devote some more thought to additional improvements that might be necessary there. Of course, at one time, all of that property was pastoral and was used for an actual farm. In fact, I can remember parts of it that I think were still at least grazing land and were used for those purposes when I was a child and my family first moved here. But in any event, it's terrific that we have that property, and I think the city can be proud of the job that it's done there. I think that we've certainly tried from the beginning with Heritage to be receptive to ideas and to be sensitive to what citizens want done and not done there. And I think that that's something that the city can take a lot of pride in. I know that, Bill, we have other things that we've done recently with some other city facilities, some improvements at Pioneer Park, for example, and maybe you want to elaborate on those.
Well, we just opened at Pioneer Park this year a new lavatory that'll serve the children and the parents that are visiting the park, particularly during the Little League soccer, Little League baseball seasons. And part of that building is a concession stand, so that if we have tournaments of any substantial size, there can be concessions sold from the various Little League groups, and that is felt to really be a nice convenience for people. especially when they're there for a series of games or events. And I think eventually Pioneer Park will get more and more use, not just for Little League play, but for picnics, family outings, and so forth.
I think you're right, and again, I think Pioneer Park has developed very well. As a Little League ball diamond, I think it's probably the premier Little League field in the system. My son played a number of games there this summer, and as the actual baseball diamonds go, I think it's one of the better ones in the area. And I think you're right. Ultimately, the idea is for it to develop into more and more of a family park. Of course, we're a little limited in terms of space there, but I think it served its purpose very well. And of course, in the vein of Heritage and Pioneer, we have two other true parks within the city system, and those are Old Town Park, which is a small park in the southeast corner of the city, and then of course we have the Bond Park baseball diamonds. But beyond that, of course, we have other city facilities, and I know that you're having to give some thought now to expansion of the district court.
Yes, you're very familiar with the need. I know that being a practicing attorney, you can relate to the problems that the judges have and other attorneys that use our court. But the caseload for the two judges has gotten to the point where a third judge is warranted, and in order to accommodate a third judge and the magistrate and the staff that will go along with that, we have to expand the court. And this November at the election, it is planned that we have a proposition on the ballot that will request that voters authorize the cities, both Farmington and Farmington Hills, to incur debt in a sufficient amount, approximately about $1.8 million, to expand the court and to allow us to provide ample facility for the court operation. So that's one issue.
Of course, with the growth that the city has had over the past 10 or 15 years, there have been, I think, increased expectations for city services. And some of the things are items that you can defer when they involve recreational uses. But of course, with court volume, you have very little control over that. And at a certain point, it only makes sense that you have to budget and do what's necessary to make sure that the judges have the room and the staff that they need to get the job done. So I think that the council was definitely convinced, and I know that you were too, and the city of Farmington as well, which shares a portion of the court costs with us, that this was the prudent thing to do. And so I'm hopeful that the voters will approve the ballot issue in November, and we can move forward with that expansion. One of the other properties, of course, that we have in the city, and maybe the one that's gotten the most attention this past year, has been the Peltz MDOT property. And as you know, of course, the council recently formed a special committee to study that property and to make recommendations as to what might ultimately be done with it. But there were certain decisions made in connection with the recent park millage renewal, and maybe you'd like to address that.
Well, regarding the parks millage renewal, if you recall, that proposition was approved May 7th by the voters. And what we asked the voters to approve was renewal of the 1/2 mil levy that had been first approved in 1986. In the 8-year period that was reauthorized for, that amount of money will raise about $9.6 million. And we had a whole laundry list of projects and items that we hope to undertake within this 8-year period. One of the major areas that received a lot of attention was the Peltz MDOT property, the property that we own that's on the west side of Farmington Road, on the south side of I-696. Together it's some 70 plus acres. It's beautiful wooded land, and been a lot of different discussions that have taken place over the past year and a half about what to do with it. So one of the initiatives that's come out this summer by the City Council is to create a special ad hoc committee to look at drawing up a master land use plan, a master facility development plan for that parcel of property. Whatever it is, whether it turns out to be a series of trails, nature trails, the Audubon Society of Detroit has offered to help build that, or anything else. The City Council has pledged that if the library eventually moves for a new site, and that this would be a prime site, that the City Council has said, yes, we would consider selling a portion of the acreage, up to 8 or 10 acres of the 70 acres, to the library for purpose of housing a new library. So that whole issue of drawing up a master plan is one of the major thrusts, one of the major initiatives that's come out of the Parks and Recreation Millage Renewal.
Well, that's right. And on that note, that's a reminder that one of the issues that continues to be at the forefront in the city is whether the library board can convince the voters that there's a necessity to build a new library and where it should be located. Of course, that was before voters a couple of years ago, and the ballot issues were defeated, but the library board continues to feel, and I think there's a growing sentiment that it's just not possible to continue the operation at the existing location on 12 Mile Road, and that at some point the library will have to be moved. And so the council did decide, after a number of public hearings on the topic of the Peltz MDOT property, that one thing we would commit to doing now is to reserve a portion of that property for a short period of time in the event the library is able to relocate there. Beyond that, right now the property is an open book, except that we have decided that to the extent that there is other available property in the 8-year term of the millage, that we won't undertake any active parks or recreation projects there. But I know that in the near future there's going to be some preliminary work done to give access to the property, and I think the council budgeted approximately $600,000 for that purpose.
Well, the $600,000 was the amount that was shown as the amount of money that would be pledged towards any activity, whatever it might be, in the Peltz MDOT property. That would include drawing up of the initial master plan for the property, as well as some access roads or access period, whether it's a road or some limited roadway, limited parking. But certainly, since we own that land, we need to be able to get around the land. We learned that from Heritage Park, whether we build a nature trail in the next year or two, we still will need to be able to police the property in the event that there's any kind of fire, be able to get into the property. And so we learned our lessons at Heritage Park. That would be one of the first things.
I think it's important to point out, to the extent people aren't otherwise aware, that the committee that we appointed to look at the property is intentionally a diverse group. I think there are 12 members of that committee, and we have representatives from a number of the boards and commissions within the city who should represent different points of view, make sure that we have a balanced representative group in determining what recommendations might be made there. And of course, among the committee members, and I think at least the temporary chairman of that group is a resident of the adjoining subdivision. One of the things, of course, we always try to do within the city, to the extent we can, is when we're going to take some action that's going to impact a residential area, is to try and remain cognizant of the concerns of the neighboring residents. And I think we've generally done a good job of that, and hopefully we'll continue to do that with respect to this property. I think that that pretty well updates people as to what's going on with city facilities and possible improvements, with the exception of a very important piece in this whole puzzle, which is the city's attempt to acquire additional acreage in the southern portion of the city for an active sports complex, and maybe you can bring us up to date on that.
Yeah, we mentioned the major thrust with regard to the Peltz MDOT property. Another major thrust is to acquire for active sports, basically for youth, but for all ages, an active sports park. And in order to do that, we've set the goal of trying to acquire significant acreage that's in one location that can be maximized in its use for Little League soccer, Little League baseball, adult softball, other active type activities, where these activities would be felt are in the proper environment. And we've identified a piece of property that consists of 90 acres. We're not trying to keep it a secret. It's located on 8 Mile Road, east of Halstead Road, and it's a parcel of property that was an old sod farm, relatively flat, that could easily be developed for active recreation without cutting down a lot of trees, without a lot of mass grading. And frankly, it looks as though, we keep our fingers crossed, we may be entitled to get a grant from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources through the Land Trust Program to help us acquire it, and if all that fits together, and we won't know, Larry, till closer to the end of the year, but if it does, hopefully we'll get a grant in the range of $1 to $2 million to help us acquire this 90 acres and begin plans to design a park, which we also have appointed a committee.
That's right. And of course, although the use to which this land would be devoted has already been determined, unlike, for example, the Pellets MDOT property, the City Council thought it was important to make sure that residents had an opportunity to be involved in the planning of this complex. And so, as you say, we appointed another committee to study this property and to make recommendations as to how this complex should ultimately shape up. And included on that committee are representatives from a number of the local youth sports groups. And again, I think that we have a representative sampling of people, and I'm sure that they'll come back with some very fine recommendations. Maybe the last thing that we want to mention is that the council is also considering appointing yet another study group, and that's in connection with the idea of perhaps a permanent senior center. And I suppose there are a number of people who aren't aware of what the city currently provides in terms of a center for the senior residents, and maybe you want to expand on that.
I guess we could, I'm going to say it's the final thrust that we've got initiated right now, and that has to do with the senior adult facility. And right now we've been leasing for a number of years space at the Mercy Center and the Mercy Conference Center, and we've had a very successful program operated on a daily, weekday basis from Mercy Center. We're going to continue to look at the possibility of expanding the lease arrangements and or a lease purchase type arrangement. And if that doesn't pan out, the possibility of either constructing a new separate facility on a different piece of property, or possibly even building our own facility on some properties owned by the Mercy people. However, in order to evaluate all those alternatives, you're right, the City Council is in the process now of putting together a special ad hoc committee to deal with that issue. So we're trying to involve the citizenry in implementing the Parks and Recreation millage program. I think that the next year is going to determine how we proceed in many of these areas.
I think you're right about that, and I think we've made a good start in these areas, and it was certainly good news that the Parks millage was renewed so we could ensure continuity in providing a number of these programs, and to try and get off the drawing board a number of ideas that people have for additional facilities. One of the things that's interesting, I think, to residents who have been around a while is the way things have evolved in the city. I've really lived here all of my life, and I know that at one time it was probably inconceivable to people that we would have some of the facilities and parks that we do, or to have the developing sidewalk system that we do to link these things together. But of course, as the city grows, people expect these things, and I think we can be very proud of how they've developed in comparison to a lot of other communities. I think that we've managed to integrate them pretty well in the community.
Well, we have been successful, and I appreciate your comments in that regard. A lot of changes have occurred in the last 10 years. And we're going to be right back with our next segment of Viewpoint and talk about some other topics.
Books, check them out. Books, check them out. Pick up a book. You got a fantasy, imagination can take you to where you want to be. Are you curious? How can you find out? Books, check them out. Books, check them out. Read about stars and cars, play electric guitars, or cops that work hard, patrolling the boulevard, the heavyweight champ and his craziest bout. Books, check them out. Books, check them out. At your library.
Welcome back to the second segment of Viewpoint for the City of Farmington Hills. I'm Bill Costick, City Manager, and with me is Councilman Larry Lichtman. We've been talking about city facilities, if you've missed the first half of the show, and future plans for implementation of our Parks and Recreation millage. What we're going to turn to now is really a problem that we've had since July 7th. It's been talked about considerably, and that is the frequency of power outages. Our purpose is not to talk about the Detroit Edison Company in any negative way at all. I think Edison has done a lot of good things in our community, and certainly we've all learned how much we rely on electrical energy today. But there's no question there are many challenges that remain. We've been a rapidly developing city, and the frequency of power outages has been a plaguing problem, especially in the growing portions of our city. Things need to be changed, things need to be done, and the City Council's dealt with this and taken a very proactive approach. I know, Larry, you've been concerned about it. You've experienced the outages, as most of us have, and it looks like we may have some initiatives on the horizon we should talk about.
Well, I think so. Of course, in connection with the recent outages, a number of residents expressed concern and wanted to know what measures the City Council and the City Administration were taking to deal with these problems. And as you're aware, Bill, one of the things that occurred is that the mayor proposed and the City Council endorsed a list of items which we passed on to Edison. There were suggestions for how we might better cope with the electrical power outages and try and prevent them from occurring in the future. And I know that you and the mayor were among those who appeared at the recent public hearings and commented on what has occurred in the city and what you would like to see done in the future to avoid these problems.
Well, we have, and of course, we don't have a lot of answers at this point. We talked with Edison extensively about their communication system so that residents who have a problem know that the complaint or the concern about the outage is transmitted properly. We've talked about the frequency of outages themselves, about the need for improved maintenance, maybe replacement of older service lines. One of the big issues we're aware of is the need for Edison to bring more power into this growing community, not only Farmington Hills, but our neighboring cities, particularly on our west border. Recently, Edison has made several modifications to what they call the Drexel substation at 12 Mile in Farmington. And we're in the process now of getting a report from Edison as to the startup of that, which will be in the month of August 1991, and what impact that will have on reliability of service. There are other things that they have to do. One of the things the City Council's talked about, and we hope to confirm in the next week or so, so I think you should be watching the local newspapers for further announcements on this, but is the possibility of the City Council sponsoring our own public meeting with Edison, where the public will be allowed to come in and voice to Edison concerns about different parts of our city that have outages or other problems, and let Edison respond.
I think that's right, and we have had a number of residents who've appeared before the council and expressed concern, and I'm sure that they'll continue to come out and make sure that we address this issue. One of the things that the city has discussed with Edison in the past, which I guess is an issue to some extent, is the possibility of initiating a tree trimming and tree replacement program in the city. Where we have overhead lines, there's some concern that trees in residential areas, and I suppose in commercial ones as well, might interfere with the lines. So that's something we continue to talk to Edison about.
And I think with all the media attention that's been focused on Edison, that we will see some positive changes occur. I think the purpose of this public meeting is to bring them in, the officials from Edison, with the public, from our community, and let's talk about it, and let's get a positive program and a mutual understanding as to where we're going to go in the future.
I think that's right. One of the, of course, one of the things that is a continuing concern to residents is the roads within the city and how they're maintained and how we cope with the ever-increasing traffic loads. One thing I think that has been very well received in terms of the comments that have been made to me is what the city has done with the boulevard, or at least the beginnings of the boulevard on 12 Mile Road. And maybe you can bring us up to date as to where that stands and what residents can expect to see going on in the future.
Well, thank you, Larry. I always like to talk about the boulevard because we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the boulevard, the first mile that's been built. And more importantly is what's going to happen in the future. We have funded the second mile of the boulevard. But the irony of the situation is that the second mile that we will build is between Haggerty and Halsted roads. And the reason for that, what many would call leapfrog, is that we've been funding 12 Mile by applying for grants through the Michigan Transportation Economic Development Fund. And only where economic development activity is occurring are you eligible to receive a grant. So with the development of the Arboretum project in the first mile, and now with the corporate park development where Nissan and NBD and other corporations are now locating, where that economic activity is occurring, we are eligible and have received a $3.2 million grant that will help us build that section. We've applied for federal funds through the new transportation reauthorization legislation that's currently in the Congress, and hopefully we might receive, if we're lucky enough, a grant for the completion of 12 Mile. The exciting thing is in the next 2 to 3 years, you will see the completion of the 12 Mile Boulevard. The plan is eventually that Novi will pick up the project and carry it all the way to 12 Oaks Mall. And of course, it will tie into the interchange that's planned to be built just west of Haggerty Road and I-696.
And I think that one of the nice things about the boulevard construction is not simply the fact that we're able to accommodate the traffic loads and try and avoid the gridlock that we have from time to time in some parts of the city, but that the development has really gone along very well in terms of being aesthetically pleasing. I've had a number of people comment to me that they like the meandering sidewalks along the boulevard and the lighting that has gone in, which is very nice.
Well, we haven't turned the lights on yet, but we hope to, and who knows where we'll go with that lighting theme. I know that you've been concerned about Orchard Lake Road as well.
Obviously Orchard Lake Road is a main corridor through the city, and it's perhaps the prime business corridor in the city. And I think that the City Council is going to be discussing that very subject in the very near future. I know that you have always tried to maintain a good relationship and balance between the residential and the business concerns in the city, and I think that one of the things we want to do is try and address the issues along Orchard Lake Road before they become a problem, and learn from the experiences of other cities that have sometimes experienced problems with their main business corridors.
Well, there are some initiatives that some council members, including yourself, are interested in proposing for the business community on Orchard Lake Road. And then we've talked about the possibility of building a boulevard from I-696 to 10 Mile.
That's right, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that that's something we've discussed in terms of available funding again, and that's probably something that's going to be contingent on funds loosening up a bit in the future.
Well, you're absolutely right. Everything costs money, unfortunately, and these road projects cost a lot of money. Well, Larry, we're out of time for now, and it's been a pleasure to have co-hosted this segment of Viewpoint with you.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and I hope it's been informative for the people at home, and we certainly would encourage them to contact the city or come out to a council meeting if they have any questions or concerns which they'd like to talk about.
Well, thanks, Larry, and thank you for watching Viewpoint for the City of Farmington Hills.